are the rules of Warhammer 40,000. Those lovely, simple, easy to grasp, quick to play rules. If you have seen any part of this video before, as this is sort of, but not really, but sort of a compilation, it has had a lot of updates since the last time you saw it, in line with the current version of 40k rules, which now change every 3 months, and there may be additional changes in between those 3 months. Hopefully these core elements of the rules stay consistent long enough for this video to provide value for everyone in the future to help you understand how to play Warhammer 40,000 10th edition. If you don't know me, I am the infiltrating, alien-hating, miracle-creating, legends-loving, wargaming vampire, Christian von Carmian. There are lots of rules in 40k and I swear they could be easy to understand. Rules I have despaired about, but in this video, I will explain them as best I can to the largest extent that I can. They are easy on paper, in the core rulebook, until you think about them in the context of other rules, or you get to the table and quickly come across a situation where the rules don't make sense anymore. Oh, precision lets me attack a character. What if there are 2 characters in the enemy unit? What if I kill them with the first precision shot? What happens to the rest of the precision shots? If I kill a character, does that count as a unit destroyed? What if they come back to life with an ability? Do they rejoin their bodyguard? Do I score victory points for assassination if the target gets back up? Does that trigger on-death abilities? Where are the rules that explain these extra interactions? You know, simple stuff. Games Workshop's aim for 10th edition was to provide a game with depth, lots of interactions, but without the massive weight of rules and modifiers that 9th edition had. Their mantra was simplified, not simple. I don't think they managed. Think about the not sensible parts of the basic attack sequence that you use in every single game. A guardsman with a melter gun is firing at some Chaos Marines who have a bunch of conditions on them. You roll 1 die and hit on a 4+. There are modifiers like stealth to make them -1 to hit, and some unit abilities from characters that also make them -1 to hit. But a result can never be modified more than +1 or -1, so you don't count one of those -1s, and your attack would hit if you rolled a 5 or a 6. However, the Imperial Guard and many others can improve the ballistic skill of an attack roll, which is not the same as having +1 to hit. With Take Aim, my ballistic skill isn't 4+, it is 3+, so I should hit on a 3, 4, 5 or 6. Although you'd think with 2 lots of -1 and this extra +1 to hit, that would come out at overall -1. Yeah, that would be okay as a net modifier. So my normal shooting of hitting on a 4, 5 or 6 would become hitting on a 5 or 6 without -1. But it isn't. You don't count changing or improving ballistic skill as part of modifying an attack roll. It changes the bar. It isn't a modifier and doesn't alter the dice roll number. So we actually succeed on a 4, 5 or a 6 because our new 3+ ballistic skill can't be modified by more than one of the -1s. Are you with me so far? Even though we modify the dice roll, so a 4 becomes a 3, a roll of a 3 becomes a 2 and fails, and a 6 becomes a 5. But anything that triggers on me rolling a 6, like sustained hits or lethal hits, is checked before adding any modifiers. That 6 will technically be a 5, but for some of the rules, it is still a 6, a critical hit, before it becomes a 5. Are you still with me? Because that is just the first roll. Next is the wound roll, and we have much the same thing. There may be +1 to wound, -1 to wound. That may happen on the wound roll. Oh, but the target also has -1 damage. When does it do that? It is after the roll for the save, or your invulnerable save negates a wound. Except for wording purposes, the enemy has been wounded. Like the Palatine's Rapturous Blows, depends on successful wounds. That is a successful wound roll. They may not actually lose any wounds from their wounds characteristic. So I'm firing a melter gun. It's on a d6 and I rolled a 2 for damage. That becomes a 1 with the -1 damage rule. But my melter gun fired by my guardsman has a melter 2 rule and is within half range, so that rule will come into effect. That +2 damage is applied after the -1. So in total, 3 damage. You knew the order of changing a set value, then division, then multiplication, then addition, then subtraction, right? You knew that was in the rules commentary. Good, good. And just so you know, damage can never be reduced below 1. In 10th edition, everything can hurt anything. but it is very unlikely that a lasgun will hurt a Titan. Any attacks that are damage 1 are not reduced to damage 0. 1 is the minimum. The exception to this are abilities that set or change damage to explicitly be 0. The Rogel Dawn tank is an example. Then we fire the next gun, a las cannon in the same squad. This is an Imperial Guard infantry squad. They are cool and we keep using them because if you can't use Warhammer 40,000 models in a Warhammer 40,000 army, it is not a new edition of a game, it is a totally different game. So the las cannon fires next, it hits, it wounds, its damage is d6 plus 1, still affected by the -1 to wound. So we roll a d6, subtract 1, and then add 1. Except we don't. You knew von Carmian wouldn't give you 2 examples of the same thing and not be willing to point out other weird rules. The d6 and the +1 are calculated before any modifiers are applied, because that +1 is not a modifier from an outside the profile rule like Melter. And there are so many rules. So we move on to the next part. Feel no pain saves. An extra unmodifiable save that some models have that prevents damage like an armor save, except you roll against each point of damage, not against the weapon's hit as a whole. A successful armor save stops all the damage from that attack roll. A successful feel no pain stops 1 point of damage. And you roll them slowly, even when you're using the fast rolling rules. Damage doesn't spill over to other models. If 2 damage to attacks hit a 1 wound model with a 4+ feel no pain, you roll 2 dice, then another 2 dice. You can't roll 4 feel no pains because it affects how many models die. No more than 2 models can die from the 2 attacks, even though they're 2 damage each. Not in 40k. But the order matters. If there were 2 damage to attacks and the first pair of dice were passed, and then the next 2 failed, that is a loss of 1 model. They lost at least 1 wound. But if the same dice results came up but in pairs of 1 success and 1 failure, 2 of those 1 wound models would die. Some dice can be rolled in big groups, others have to be rolled slowly. So that core mechanic of shooting and taking casualties was easy to follow, right? I explained it in more detail than Games Workshop has, and still, some people won't get it. Hit rolls, wound rolls, save rolls, additional rules are the rules you have to deal with in the basic playing of any game. Even the Combat Patrol, which is sort of an easy way into 40k. And those armor saves that I didn't explain much may have an additional modifier if the target has the benefit of cover. We will come back to the attacking rules, but that is where we're going to go next. The wonderful, annoyingly complex world of the benefit of cover. In 10th edition of Warhammer 40,000, you get cover. Your mum gets cover. Your mum's dog is in cover. Your mum's dog's chew toy has cover, and you better believe that the fluff on the chew toy of your dog that your mum has is also getting the benefit of cover. Now, the benefit of cover rule seems really simple. If a ranged attack is against a model that's in cover, it gets +1 to its save. The simple version is it caps out 3+, so if you're a, say, Sister of Battle, and you have a 3+ save and you get hit by an attack, you don't get any extra benefit. You don't go to a 2+ save, unlike in 9th edition, it stays at 3+. If you were hit by an AP-1 weapon, then the cover kicks in, so you stay at that 3+. The exception to this is if you have a 2+ save already, like you're a Terminator, then you don't reset the save to 3+. A AP-1 will still keep you on a 2+ save. It's just that against AP-0, you can't get better than a 3+ save. So a Tau model with a 4+ save, that goes into cover, it has a 3+ save. The issue I have with cover is really the issue with visibility. So much of the terrain interacts with the visibility rules. Look at the ruins, the most common terrain feature based on the model kit sold, and it is the main terrain feature you see at tournaments. You don't just get cover from ruins by being in the ruins. You also get cover if the model you allocate the enemy attack to is not visible, because they're in the street behind the ruins. So even though their mate is right here in the open and is being shot at by everyone in the attacking unit, if you allocate the attack to the guy that they can't even see, that's a model that gets the benefit of cover. The only person in this unit not getting the benefit of cover is the one dude standing out in the open, and there's no reason to take them off first. It really does seem like everyone gets cover all of the time unless they're hit by an ignore cover weapon. If one model can't see all of the enemy model, then the whole of the target unit gets cover against all of the shots. Each model the attack is against has to be visible to all the models in the attacking unit. So this purple unit is out in the open. They're having a picnic. They have not a care in the world. And this black unit moves up, and all but one of the black token unit can see a model completely. And that last guy is cleaning his glasses behind a big impassable rock that is battlefield debris. But because not all of the attacking unit can completely see all of one model in the enemy unit, that purple unit, sipping tea, now has the benefit of cover. When they're out in the fluffing field. You don't need abilities like you get cover if you're more than 12 inches away from the enemy that the Raven Guard style Space Marine detachment has. It seems everyone's getting cover anyway. Indirect fire makes more sense. You don't need to faff about trying to think, oh, can we see it or not, because you're firing indirectly. You know they're going to get the benefit of cover, and that's how indirect fire works. If, again, we take that first example, where there's one person that the indirect fire weapon can see, like an exorcist, it can see one person but not the rest of them, then the same rules as that would apply. If the attack was allocated against that one in the open, they wouldn't get the benefit of cover, but against all the other three, then they would. But the reason you would have the exorcist fire at this unit rather than one further off on the other side of the board is you get -1 to hit on top of giving the enemy the benefit of cover. So shooting at this unit, you wouldn't get the -1 to hit because you can at least see one model in that unit. But thinking of tanks, you would think tanks block line of sight. And they do. They're a physical model. They block line of sight. You can't see through your own models and units. But let's look at the line of sight again. We aren't drawing an uninterrupted line from one model to the enemy model. We use true line of sight from any part of the model. So if you slam your head onto the table and peek under the tank's armored skirt, there's line of sight to the enemy. You can still shoot under a tank. Your ankles can see my ankles. This isn't as bad as in previous editions where an Eldar or Tau unit could shoot under their own tank but the enemy couldn't shoot back. But it stops tanks, unless sideways and not skimmers, from blocking line of sight, which is the thing that tanks have done since they were invented in the 1910s. As I say, I don't know how cover works. It is technically less complex than previous editions where there were thousands of variations of alternate cover rules that you could apply to different terrain items. But if you have any advice for understanding cover for 10th edition, I would love to read it in the comments, please. There is another thing I figured out for 10th edition cover. Units don't give each other cover when you're taking fire. So Gretchen can stand in front of an Orc Boy unit, and the Orc Boys don't get cover even though they're not fully visible to the attacker. It's only if you're not fully visible because of terrain features. Gretchen don't provide the benefit of cover, but having one Orc way off in the corner that no one can see would give that Orc a benefit of cover. So I think I've understood cover well enough now. So we have a Screamer Killer. I can see all of its base. And if I remove this tip me alert for Ko-Fi that reminds you that you can tip me a couple of dollars at the link in the description below, then I am out in the open. All of my base can see all of its base. So it doesn't have cover. Right? Right? Wrong! It has cover because the tip of its claw is not visible and is behind the wall. So not all of the model is visible. Oh, make it simple, Games Workshop says. Oh, it'll be fine. Just simplify everything. It's not going to just become an issue. At this point, I don't know if, rules as written, and we are thinking Krankenfoof levels here, could you have an arm that has come off the model, you throw that under the table into your terrain box, and no enemy model can see all of your model, so you are always getting the benefit of cover. I don't know how cover works at this point, but I feel that everyone, everywhere is getting the benefit of cover. So what do? Well, we can make up our own cover rules with our opponent. Tanks are bricks, you can't shoot under them or through them or over the top of them. Being on top of a platform, that could give you plunging fire, but not the benefit of cover. I think it'd be really cool if, like, being on an exposed hill gave you a benefit. So with plunging fire, your attacks gain an extra point of armor penetration. That could be cool, but the trade-off is that you are very exposed. Any enemies can shoot you. So being on top of a hill or being on top of an armored container, it could work like that. It doesn't in the rules, but I think that'd be cool. We could have it so that models in the attacking unit give cover on a model-by-model basis. It takes a little longer, but it makes more sense. So if I have 5 models that can fully see all of the models in your unit, then you shouldn't get cover, even if I have one dude who can't shoot at all. That doesn't make sense to me. Why are you getting cover in the open? So we could do it like that. That model's not shooting. Sure, the enemy would get cover against it, but there's no bullets firing, so it doesn't matter. The other 5 in the squad, yeah, they can see the enemy in the open. So you don't get the benefit of cover. If you're not firing a model, why would you give your enemy cover because the man isn't shooting and cannot see to shoot? Or we could just choose to play an army with a 3+ save, who isn't getting the benefit of cover against AP0 weapons. There you go, play Battle Sisters, because then you don't need to think too much about the cover rule. At least for your own models. Or you could set up your army to just be absolutely focused on removing cover from everything. Have the conflagration missiles on the Exorcist. Play the Gene Stealer cult. Then, whenever you come from below, your attack's having no cover. If you have a Ridge Runner for the Gene Stealer cult, use the Augur Array, because that means that whatever it shoots at, anyone else shooting at that unit doesn't get the benefit of cover. If you play Space Marines, take lots of Infernus Marines. Their flamers ignore cover. And I realize now that I have long held a subconscious aversion to dealing with the benefit of cover, and this is why I play Adeptus Sororitas, Gene Stealer Cult, and Deathwatch. You learn something about yourself every day. Or you could go the opposite way and play a horde of models that get the benefit of cover if they were standing naked in the desert. Acadian Command Squad gives its unit the benefit of cover if they are on an objective. I'm sure the whole platoon can hide behind the Servo Skull objective, no problem. Oh, and the Imperial Guard orders break the rules again. A save can't be improved by more than 1, except it can with orders. Get an additional +1 to save on top of the benefit of cover, as long as it isn't better than 3+. So their 5+ save might as well be a 3+ save. The Recon Detachment gives you bonuses when you have the benefit of cover. So those guardsmen standing in the open desert have the same armor save as a Battle Sister. Just remember that the benefit of cover only works against ranged attacks. Curling up on the floor won't save you against a superhuman with a sword. See, that was simple. You can assume that everyone has cover all of the time and forever. That is the simplified understanding. Or you can go so deep into the rules that you have so little time for other war games, other things in your life. I might have children, but I don't remember if I do because I spent so long poring over the rules, so it makes a modicum of sense. The models are my children now. We are done with cover. For the moment. Cover and saves are calculated on a model-by-model basis and then rolled one at a time, which I will explain a bit more in the next section on the shooting phase. Some rules affect models, some rules affect units. This will be particularly important when we get to precision. And we can't understand that until we understand the perfectly simple and counterintuitive shooting phase rules, which requires a costume change. We're going to talk about bullets, how the bullets are meant to work on the tabletop, how the rules in 10th edition 40k affect the bullets, and how we get the bullets into the people. 10th edition of 40k uses true line of sight, so from any part of the model to any part of the enemy model. A Dark Eldar Raider can fire its Dark Lance from its prow sticking out from behind a building at the wingtips of Magnus the Red, whose base is fully behind the building but the wingtips are sticking out. This is normal in 10th edition, but there's more. The Raider has the firing deck ability, so the Kabbalite warriors being carried by the Raider can fire through the Raider prow as well. Although with the firing deck rule, what is happening in rules terms is that the Kabbalites are passing their guns over to the Raider and the Raider fires the guns for them. Welcome to the shooting phase in 10th edition. I am going to explain the weird cases, the odd stuff, the unusual rule situations and how they are resolved, and I will try and stay sane during this video. I am doing my best. This edition uses the rule for true line of sight. If you can see a thing, you can shoot a thing. Just put your face on the table, resist the urge to inhale the fake grass, and use your human eyes in your human eye holes to see if your model can see. But we will also be getting to situations where you kill models you can't see, and that isn't with indirect fire weapons. True line of sight is silly. but requires fewer words to explain than in past editions, even if I prefer the past editions. And line of sight is drawn from any part of the model, not just the hull, not the gun barrels, not just the base, any part of the model. So this end of the protruding barrel on this Predator lets you fire the main gun and the sponson guns, even though the sponson guns are behind the building. And any other guns it has can all fire from that big cannon without needing to be indirect fire. It is simpler to understand than figuring out line of sight and firing angles for each gun with extra images and classifications of what kind of gun can fire where. And there were different standards for dreadnoughts, which are vehicles, but not the Carnifex as guns because that is a monster even though it is the same size as the dreadnought. That was just the past. Everything is firing from any part of any model. Now that we've got the concept of looking at stuff down, we move on to the main thing you need to remember for the rest of the video and the shooting phase generally. All shots happen at the same time, even though they are resolved one at a time. This is confusing, but also the easiest way to think of it. Remember this. It is the most important thing you will learn today. Unless you're like learning how to drive or something, whatever's happening in your own life. I have some data about you, but not all of the data. Happy birthday. But only if that's applicable. So here's an example. A tactical squad shoots at a Necron warrior squad. The Necron warriors all have the same toughness. The tactical squad, a wonderful unit, is made up of 7 marines with bolters, a sergeant firing a bolt pistol, 1 marine has a plasma gun, and 1 marine has a missile launcher. Even if the marine right at the back of the squad couldn't see through the gaps in legs and under arms of his fellows to see the Necron warriors, you are able to shoot through friendly models in the same unit. You do not get to fire through all friendly models. So if there was a massive Hammerfall bunker in the way, it's a friendly model, but it's not part of the same unit as the tactical squad, so tactical marines can't shoot through it as if it wasn't there. But contrary to all the things we just said about using your eyes and line of sight doesn't apply like that because models in the same unit don't block each other. It's almost like you take off every other model in the squad to check line of sight from one guy before putting them back on, metaphorically. In battle terms, it is assumed that the squad is coordinated enough so that the people in front will crouch or go prone so that they don't get shot in the back of the head. You declare your targets and then all the bullets are fired. The rules don't say all the bullets are fired, but the rest of the rules are based on the pre-assumption that at this one moment, all of the bullets are fired. So the 7 bolters and the bolt pistol are firing at the Necron warriors, the plasma gun is firing at the Necron warriors and chooses to overcharge. It gets an extra point of strength, so it's running on 2s rather than 3s, and the missile launcher has to choose what kind of missile it's using. In this case, it picks a frag missile. All models in the tactical squad can see the enemy unit, so we're fine. All of them can shoot. Fighting in 40k is mostly considered on a unit-to-unit basis, not model-to-model. Mostly. All models in the tactical squad can see at least one Necron warrior model, so all the tactical marines can shoot the enemy unit. So the bolters fire first, and all of the shots from the bolters, which is 2 per model, are rolled together. And also the bolt pistol is rolled at the same time because it has the same profile. Hits on a 3+, strength 4, AP 0. So you roll those 14, 15 dice, you roll to hit, you roll to wound. Saves are taken one at a time, as there are 2 different saves in this target unit. Some of the models are out in the open, some are getting the benefit of cover. That's because cover is mostly figured out model by model, while shooting is done unit to unit. So the Necron warrior player chooses to take a lot of the saves on the models in the open, they're on a 4+, and when they're killed, they're removed from the board. Any remaining successful wounds are then taken on the models at the back with the cover save. They can't be seen because there's a big ruin in the way, and that grants the benefit of cover. Stick with me on this. The attacks are against a unit as a whole, but if there are more attacks to be assigned, they keep on being applied until the unit is destroyed. In past editions like 7th edition, the attacks stopped once all the models in line of sight were dead. but that is not how it works in 10th edition. If there are saves still to be taken and there are models still alive in the target unit, you keep taking those saves. So the missile launcher fires next. Blast still works on the missile launcher, and the bonus shots from Blast are figured out when the attack from the unit is declared, not the moment the dice are rolled. And even though right now the Marine with the missile launcher can't see any enemy models, the rules for shooting are that if your model could see an enemy when the target unit was declared, then it can still shoot. Like I say, even though it's not explicitly stated, it is easiest to think of all of these shots happening at once. The missile launcher gets d6 attacks with the frag missile and adds 1 to the number of attacks because when the attack was declared, there were at least 5 models in the enemy unit, but fewer than 10 models. For every 5 models, you get 1 attack. That is Blast. And the bonus attacks from Blast apply to each Blast weapon, not to your model or unit as a whole. So 5 barb gaunts firing at 5 enemies would give you 5 lots of d6 plus 1. So at worst, you get 10 shots. It isn't 5d6 and then 1 more shot for a worst result possible of 6 shots. The bonus number of shots is applied to each blast weapon. So the missile launcher kills the rest of the squad. And there we have just the perfect representation of shooting in 10th edition. You fire at the robot called Jim with lots of bullets because you can see Jim, and the robot called Bobby, who is hiding behind a wall, died as well. Is it machine empathy? Who's to say? But these are the rules of 10th edition. The plasma gun hasn't rolled their dice, but it still has fired, and so you still roll a hazardous test for the Marine with the plasma gun. Okay, so in a similar way, if this was a close combat and all the Marines attacked and wiped out the enemy unit, but the sergeant or an attached lieutenant hadn't rolled their dice yet, even if they consolidate into another unit, the sergeant or character is assumed to have already made their attacks. You just didn't physically roll the dice because that would be a waste of time when the enemy is already dead. The attacks all being done at the same time matters because even though you are rolling the attacks one at a time or by weapon, a Genestealer Cult Ridge Runner can't hit an enemy with its heavy stubbers, finish the attacks with the heavy stubber, and then use the crossfire rule on itself before firing its main gun. No, because all of the shots happen at the same time, and when it's finished firing all of the guns, then you apply the crossfire rule. This is also important because you declare your targets for all of your weapons before you fire any of them. So you couldn't fire the bolt guns, kill all but one of the Necron warriors, and then put a single missile into one of them to finish them off if you had already declared that the missile was going to be shot elsewhere. Are we still okay? We're still okay. It's making sense? Good, good. Let's get more confusing. Because I'm hoping that this video will become a useful thing of, if someone says, I don't understand this weird thing in the shooting phase, you can just send them this video and them and I can suffer together. So elsewhere, Necrons are shooting at a Proteus kill team, but this unit has 4 Terminators, toughness 5, a bike at toughness 5, and 5 Deathwatch veterans that are toughness 4. It therefore has an equal number of models at toughness 5 and toughness 4. Normally, when you are calculating the toughness of what you are shooting at, you use the highest toughness in the bodyguard unit. So if you attach a Neuro Tyrant, very high toughness, to Neuro Gaunts, you use the Neuro Gaunts toughness 3 because they're the bodyguard unit, and the highest toughness in that Neuro Gaunt unit is the toughness 3. But there is a Deathwatch specific rule that overrides the rules commentary. Gretchen also have a similar thing where the one orc boy in the unit is not counted for the whole unit's toughness, even though they're not a character. You don't use the highest toughness in a Gretchen unit, you don't use the Runtherder's toughness 5, you use the toughness 2 of the Gretchen, but that's only because it said so on that unit. But we've established that this Deathwatch unit, for the Deathwatch rule that they are toughness 5. So the Chronomancer in the Immortal unit rolls their dice first and saves are taken on the bike model and the bike dies. Then the rest of the Necron Immortal unit roll their attack dice. At this point, the point where we are rolling the dice for the Immortals attacks, toughness 4 is now the majority toughness, but it doesn't matter because we roll against what the toughness was when the Necron Immortal unit declared its attacks. The Chronomancer character is in the unit using the leader keyword and attached unit rule. They are just as much a part of the unit as any other model in it. So the Immortals fire and kill one Terminator. Okay, that unit is now done rolling dice. Now a completely different Necron unit shoots at the same Proteus kill team, and they are firing against their toughness of 4. Because there are 5 models left in that unit that are toughness 4, 3 models that are toughness 5. It doesn't matter where the Deathwatch wants to assign any wounds, Terminator or Veteran, all of the shots are resolved against toughness 4. The only part that matters when assigning wounds is the armor save of the model. When the Proteus kill team comes to fire back at the Immortals, you can't assign wounds to the Chronomancer character in an attached unit voluntarily, much as you may love to tank all of the shooting on a Canoness's 2+ invulnerable save. Shooting in characters is explained more a bit later on. So you're thinking, okay, well, if all of the attacks are essentially resolved at the same time, why can't I just roll all the dice at the same time? Why does it matter that I have to do it profile by profile? It matters for the different armor saves. So in that Proteus kill team, I might want to assign the wounds to a Terminator, because if there's no AP and the attacks are damage 1, I will go for the best save possible. And I have to keep assigning wounds to that one Terminator until that Terminator dies. I can't switch midway through if another profile started attacking. If you have assigned attacks to a model already in that phase, you keep assigning attacks to that model until it dies. So this also matters for multi-damage attacks happening at the same time as single damage attacks. Even if a multi-damage like damage 2 attack is happening conceptually at the same time as the damage 1 attacks, this is when the order you resolve the attacks matters. If you are facing an enemy with wounds characteristic 3, and there is an enemy model on 1 wound left, rolling and resolving your damage 1 attacks first, which have to be assigned to that wounded model, before your single damage 3 attack, that's a good idea. Your damage 1 attacks might finish off that 1 remaining wound, leaving the damage 3 attack to instantly kill another 3 wound enemy model. If you did the damage 3 attack first, it would just kill that model with 1 wound remaining. There is no spillover in 40k 10th edition. The damage 3 would do enough wounds to kill that model, and that would be it. But then the damage 1 attacks might hurt the next enemy a little bit. See, this is the difference between killing 1 tough enemy and killing 2 tough enemies. You can decide after rolling 1 profile which profile you want to use next. If the attacks were from a Paragon Warsuit unit with Morven Val, you want Val to be the model to deliver the finishing blow to an enemy unit, because if she destroys an enemy unit, you get a miracle dice. And an extra miracle dice is always a good thing regardless of the state of miracle dice at the time you watch this. So you may want to fire the multi-melters with the Paragon Warsuits first, see that there is only 2 wounds left on the enemy tank, and then fire Vol's Fidelis Heavy Bolter. If that didn't finish the enemy, roll for her missiles next to try and be sure that Val is the model that destroys the enemy unit. But let's go another level deeper, and to a different battlefield. We now have the Genestealer cult against Space Marines. So we have a unit of 5 Acolytes, they are with a Primus and a Locus. Normally you can only have 1 character attached to a unit, but the Locus special rule says in a battle line unit, you can have them and a Primus. So this unit, which is a whole unit of 7 models, they are targeted with Oath of Moment by the Space Marine player. This is an ability that lets you reroll all hit rolls against the target. The Bodyguard unit is Toughness 4. They get shot by bolters, and all the Acolyte bodyguards die. At this point, just at this point, because there's more attacks to be made, the unit does not split into 3 units of dead Acolytes, a lone Locus, and a lone Primus. We still have attacks to make, and the shots can now be allocated to the leaders. So, easiest way to think of it is all the shots happening at once. You can't save your leader at this point by claiming they are now a separate unit. The bullets are already coming their way, and they don't get wasted or lost. Just don't get hung up on the idea that attack rolls are meant to be resolved 1 at a time, because the rules are all designed around fast rolling. So there are now more bullets coming towards our dying Acolytes and the Locus and Primus. What we do as the Genestealer cult player is be tricksy in where we allocate wounds. All the missile shots and plasma blasts to come are still rolling against the toughness 4 of the bodyguard acolytes, so it doesn't matter that the Primus is toughness 3. For the moment, they are still one unit. Since we only have characters left, we Genestealer Cult players can allocate the attacks to the Primus, because the Locust grants a 4+ Feel No Pain to other characters. It doesn't give itself a Feel No Pain. So those continuing attacks from that same one enemy unit attacking us can be resisted with a Feel No Pain. The Primus in the Xenocreed detachment would get a 3+ Feel No Pain while the bodyguard is alive, and if the bodyguard unit dies around them but the same enemy unit still has more shots to come, he keeps the 3+ Feel No Pain until that enemy unit has finished firing. Then when that unit is done, all the rules trigger for a unit being destroyed, like losing the 3+ Feel No Pain, deciding if you are going to spend resurgence points to bring on a new unit identical to the Acolytes. Even though the formerly attached character is still alive, Cult Ambush doesn't work on character models that don't have the Cult Ambush special rule, like the Primus and Nexus. The reason that it happens now is so that rules like Deadly Demise don't trigger in the middle of a shooting attack and mess up who is left to fire, because if you were shooting at something that might explode, and then it exploded and killed one of the attacking models, how do you figure out if that was a model that's already fired their bullets or not? So this is a simpler way. So once the attacking Marine unit is done, the Acolytes are dead, the Primus is now a character on its own, the Locust is now a character on its own, and they both become Oath of Moment targets, as that is a persisting effect. But as I understand it, say the Locust and Primus were also killed in the attack. It would count as 3 units being destroyed as the unit splits after death to score victory points. Otherwise it gets stupid if you could wipe out everyone in one go, but that would only count as 1 kill, whereas if you had just enough attacks to break apart the unit by killing the Acolytes, and then a separate unit shot the Locust and the Primus, that would count as 3 victory points. So if the Locust, Primus and Acolytes had all been killed in one go, they would split into 3 dead units, and the Space Marine player would score equivalent victory points for killing 3 separate units. But just to add that feeling of inconsistency, if this was based on the secondary mission marked for death, and that Acolyte unit with the Primus and the Locust had been selected, you would have to kill the Acolytes and at least one of the characters in order to score that secondary mission. Oh, isn't the shooting phase fun? This has been my best effort to explain the silly abstractions of shooting in 40k. Logic and common sense don't come into it. You know, a melee-focused army sounds so much easier to play. Run at the enemy! You don't have to think about shooting. You stab people, and then you get to die. And subscribe to the channel. World Eaters are happy. Except, there are more rules to learn. These rules affect both ranged and melee weapons. 10th edition has a lot of simple universal rules. You will see the same rule on lots of weapons. On their own, they are simple. Lethal hits. If you roll a critical hit on the hit roll, you don't need to roll to wound. You automatically wound. It gets more confusing when they stack. We are going to build into what happens when you have sustained hits and lethal hits and full rerolls and +1 to hit. Maybe you have thought, yep, got it. More likely, you think you've got it, but you would like to go through it slowly all the same, just to be sure. And I think that's where most of my audience lies. If you think that this combination of rules is never going to come up, I introduce you to the Deathwatch Index 2 Alive and Loving It. The Fortis Kill team has Marines with bolters. Those bolters have lethal hits as part of their profile. In the Black Spear Task Force, sustained hits can be selected for all of your units that have the Mission Tactics rule, like the Fortis Kill team. Now they have sustained hits and lethal hits. When the Fortis Kill team is attacking a unit below starting strength, they get +1 to hit. And as Adeptus Astartes, once again, they can use the Oath of Moment. This lets you reroll all hit rolls against the chosen target. We know about +1 to hit, we have done that earlier in the video. If you can reroll a hit roll, you can reroll any hit roll, even successes. And you may do this because you want critical hits instead of regular hits because you have something like lethal hits and want to wound a very tough enemy. No matter how many rules let you reroll something, you can't reroll a reroll. So we can't follow this up with command reroll. Sustained hits 1 means that if you have a critical hit, you get 2 successful hits from that 1 dice and get to roll 1 extra dice when you are rolling to wound. If you had sustained hits 1 from something like mission tactics and were using it on a weapon like the heavy bolter that already has sustained hits 1, mathematics becomes a lie. 1 plus 1 isn't 2. 1 plus 1 is 1. You don't add sustained hits together, but you can use the best version. If you add sustained hits 2 and sustained hits 1 together, you can pick whichever one you like. So pick sustained hits 2 for 2 additional successful hits if you roll a 6. So how do you combine lethal hits and sustained hits as both can trigger from the same critical hit? Sustained hits 1 would give you the original successful hit die and another die in the wound pool, but lethal hits turn successful critical hits into auto wounds. How many dice auto wound and how many are there in the wound pool to be rolled to wound? 1 of each. The die you rolled and got a 6 on becomes a lethal hit and automatically wounds. Then you add to the wound pool 1 additional dice to be rolled to wound because of sustained hits 1. So now we have to combine that with the rerolls and +1 to hit. Here is the annoying bit. There isn't a guide on the order to do these in within the rules commentary or an easy guide within the shooting phase or fight phase sequence. You have to look at the rule on rerolls to find the order. So in our example, there is one Fortress Marine with a Deathwatch bolt rifle. He rolls 2 dice and gets a 6 and a 4. First, we do rerolls, so we aren't adding sustained hits into the pool yet, we aren't checking for critical hits. We do the rerolls, I will reroll the 4 to try and get a 6, but I got a 5. Okay, now we check for critical hits on the unmodified dice. The 6 is a critical hit. That will give us 1 die into the wound pool to be rolled and 1 lethal hit that auto wounds. Then we do modifiers. That 5 becomes a 6 and is a successful hit, but we don't trigger lethal or sustained hits on it because it was not an unmodified critical hit. We have already done the check for critical hits part. That 5 turning to a 6 is a regular successful hit. Then we come to the wound roll. There are no modifiers, rerolls, or special abilities here. We have 2 dice to roll. One was a successful hit, the other successful hit was taken out to become a lethal hit, but 1 more die was added from sustained hits 1. If they were all successful, our opponent would have to make 3 armor saves, 2 successful wound rolls, plus the additional lethal hit. That is how a Space Marine can kill 3 enemies from firing 2 shots with a bolter. Now we need a new example for a new situation. Let's combine another 2 abilities. Devastating Wounds is one of them. With Devastating Wounds, if you roll a critical wound, usually a 6 to wound, the weapon will cause mortal wounds equal to the weapon damage instead of regular damage. This could be 1 wound from a combi weapon, it could be 12 wounds from a Shadow Swords Volcano Cannon, but it isn't really mortal wounds and 10th edition has flipped back and forth on what it is. Currently, early 2025, Devastating Wounds are mortal wounds insofar as they ignore armor saves and invulnerable saves, except that they are not like mortal wounds because Devastating Wounds cannot affect more than 1 model. 6 mortal wounds can kill 6 1-wound models. 6 Devastating Wounds from the same weapon will only kill 1 1-wound model. First of all, I will mention how Devastating Wounds interact with lethal hits. A lethal hit means you successfully wound. You don't count as having rolled any particular result on the dice, and it is not a critical wound, just a successful wound. So a lethal hit can never become a devastating wound, because you don't roll to wound. That's something to bear in mind before you add LF10 and 2 grants lethal hits to your Deathwatch veterans whose Xenophase Blade and Big Hammers have devastating wounds. Anti is the other special rule. Anti-Infantry 3+ means you will be successfully wounding infantry on a 3, 4, 5 or 6, even if those would otherwise be failures. Strength 4 against Toughness 4, a 3 to wound would normally fail. Now it succeeds. If you were Strength 8, Anti-Infantry 3+, a 2 would also be successful as normal. But the reason the 3, 4, 5, 6 are successful is because they are critical wounds. Anti changes what is a critical wound, so it isn't just a roll of a 6. Devastating Wounds suddenly became a lot easier. You can strip the save and invulnerable save from models that have them, usually characters. But there's a dedicated rule for killing characters. Precision. Now we explore precision, and to understand precision, we need to understand characters a bit more. I'm going to change outfit now. 10th edition sure does love its character interactions, but it also harks back to the earlier versions of Warhammer 40,000, the editions before 8th edition, you had independent characters, which were actually not independent at all. They joined units, but they could also leave units and run around by themselves if they so wished. Then we got 8th and 9th edition when it was all about auras, and a load of confusing different rules to explain when and how and if a character can be shot. Now, thankfully, it's much simpler, but some of it still needs explaining. Leaders. They join squads, and they do not get to leave them. So leaders are not quite the same as independent characters were in previous editions. Once you put a leader in a unit, which you do before deployment, they are one unit for all rules purposes. Once that unit is together, it is an attached unit. So 10 acolytes with a primus, they will have a starting strength of 11. So it needs to lose 6 models to go below half strength and then have to take a battle shock test in the command phase. So that aforementioned Space Marine Lieutenant can join a Space Marine Tactical Squad. So they go together as an attached unit. The Lieutenant being the character, the Tactical Squad becoming the bodyguard. These are official terms. Characters can be deployed alone. You don't have to make them part of an attached unit. If you have a Dialogus and you choose not to put her in a unit, she could be shot as normal. Characters don't become lone operatives unless they have the lone operative rule, like the Reductus Saboteur does. It will tell you on the unit card if they are a lone operative. Lone operative prevents your models from being shot if the enemy is over 12 inches away. Much simpler than all the lookouts rules from 8th and 9th edition. The Vindicare Assassin ignores lone operative, which is very rare and very powerful. If your character can join units, it will say on the unit card which units they can join. When you're putting characters in a unit, it is usually only one, but some characters have exceptions to this, so here is an Imagifier that specifies that you can add this leader to a unit that already has another leader, as long as that leader is a Canoness or Palatine or Junior Tharutia or Astrid and Agatha, in a squad of Battle Sisters. So there's some wording to check there. It isn't just, oh yeah, you can double up with this particular character. It will tell you which units you can join and which other characters you can double up with, if there are any. So you can't have an Imagifier and a Dialogus in a squad of Sacrosancts, and you couldn't have an Imagifier and a Dialogus in a squad of Battle Sisters either. It is hard capped at 2 character units joining a bodyguard unit. Even though you can add a Dialogus to a Battle Sister squad that has a Canoness, and you can add an Imagifier to a Battle Sister squad that has a Canoness, you can't add a Dialogus and Imagifier and Canoness to a Battle Sister squad. What if that whole unit gets attacked? Well, you always use the toughness of the bodyguard, which can sort of suck if you've bought the Leviathan box set and you want to put your Neuro Tyrant in a squad of Neuro Gaunts. Then all of the shots will go against its toughness of 3. That includes precision attacks, so even though the sniper may be deliberately targeting the Neuro Tyrant, they roll to wound against the Neuro Gaunt's toughness of 3. This is because precision only comes into effect at the point where damage is assigned, and the part where you assign damage comes after the roll to wound. That is counterintuitive, but that is how it works. And the way attached units are, you use the bodyguard toughness for all of the attacks that are coming in, which maybe makes it not the best idea to put the Neuro Tyrant in that squad. The rules for units are that if you have a model in your unit that has wounds already allocated to it, then when the unit takes damage again, the attacks have to be allocated to the model that has lost wounds. However, characters are the exception to this. Injured characters don't suddenly take all the damage. No guardsman is crying out, "Oh sir, are you hurt? Let me use you as a human shield!" No. They continue to protect their injured officer, so this would also apply if the officer had injured themselves with an overheating plasma weapon, assuming they had more than 3 wounds so they could survive it. You put the wound still on bodyguard models until they're all gone. Precision specifies that you target a model with the character keyword, so you can only target the character models, not anyone in the squad. Units share all keywords, so in theory the squad would share the character keyword, but the rules commentary advises that you check if it refers to a model or a unit on the rule itself. So firing an anti-psycho weapon like a Condemner bolt gun at the Neuro Tyrant and Neuro Gaunts, the attached unit as a whole does have the psychic keyword because there's a model that has the psychic keyword and the unit shares all keywords. So any model in that unit can be wounded by the Anti-Psycho 2 plus Condemner bolt gun, not just the Neuro Tyrant. The psychic keyword is the example used in the rules commentary, so I'm very sure about this one. Other rules specify only affects models. The fly keyword is a good example. If attacked by a weapon with anti-fly 2+, a Battle Sister squad with Junith would have a Battle Sister wounded on a 2+. The attached unit has the keyword, and unless it is precision, the wound is allocated to the bodyguard model. But when moving, the fly rules refer to models specifically with the fly keyword, not units. So Junith is the only one that can fly and move quicker around the battlefield. The Battle Sisters accompanying her do not become acrobats just because Junith is in the squad. As soon as the bodyguards are all dead, that is a unit destroyed. The Canoness and the Imagifier become characters by themselves. Two separate units. So if the enemy needed to destroy one unit, they have destroyed one unit. If there were any persisting effects, a common example would be Oath of Moment. If someone, some dirty heretic, someone who uses space wolves, I mean look at these, they're clearly disgusting mutants. And they use chaos armor parts to keep their units going in combat. That is all kinds of heresy. So you might find yourself playing against some space wolves. Horrible werewolf creatures. Of course, if my opponent was playing space wolves, I would be very polite. But inside, I would be seething, going, oh, look at these awful dog creatures. Not like a good boy thing, more like a matted, haggard, mangy creature. So you're fighting them. They have used Oath of Moment on your Battle Sister Canoness Imagifier squad. Once the Battle Sisters are all destroyed, the Imagifier and the Canoness both are subject still to the Oath of Moment. So whatever effects were placed on that squad when it was a whole, now persist on those individual models once it's split. So yes, there is now an Oath of Moment declared on both of those models, the Imagifier and Canoness. Precision is a universal ability that you'll see in a lot of weapons, and a lot of characters and units have it, like this very annoying Lictor. It works the same way in shooting and combat, which can be a little counterintuitive. What you need to have, and all you need to have, is line of sight. And then as long as your ranged weapon is in range, you can assign a wound to a character in a unit, and that model has to take the save. In combat, as long as you are attacking an attached unit, as long as you have line of sight to that character, your attacks can be made against that character model. So as long as that character isn't hiding around a corner where you can't see them, you are in close combat with the unit, the attached unit as a whole, so you can allocate your precision attacks to that character. You don't need to be within 1 inch of them or anything like that. Line of sight is the only thing you require. That can sound a bit weird, but that is how it's meant to work. Already the rule is sounding a little bit complicated, and there's definitely more to it than this. But this rule is all about attached units. So precision lets you target the lieutenant in that tactical squad, even though the attached unit rule means that you can't allocate wounds to a character first. You have to put them on the bodyguard models. You know, the other soldiers in the squad. Precision does overrule that. That is the whole purpose of the precision rule. Even if you have Celestine and her Gemini in a unit of Seraphim, an attacker with precision cannot deliberately target a Gemini model. Although the 3 model unit has the character keyword, if the 3 ladies are in a unit of Seraphim, they snipe Celestine as a model, as that is a model with a character keyword. The Gemini models do not have that. Although, as an attached unit, you, as the sister player, could choose to take off a Gemini model first before a Seraphim, as in an attached unit, they become part of the bodyguard. There is another situation in the rule that we can make use of to make this unit last even longer. Now, when a character is in an attached unit, you can't allocate attacks to that character. And the reason we would want to do that with Celestine is because of life wards. As long as there's at least 1 Gemini superior there, Celestine has a 4+ feel no pain. That doesn't mean the attack is reallocated to the Gemini, it's just Celestine gets a feel no pain. So while in a unit of Seraphim or Zephyrim, you can't allocate attacks to Celestine, but if she's by herself, and by herself I mean Celestine plus 2 Gemini as she comes here, that isn't an attached unit. That is just a unit. One of them has a character keyword, but it's not an attached unit, so this rule, which is all about attached units, doesn't trigger. So just the 3 of them can be very tough. You allocate hits to Celestine, then not only are we using the 2+ save with the 4+ invulnerable save, we're also getting a 4+ feel no pain, and if she dies, as the first model she would die, because when you keep allocating attacks to a model, you keep allocating them there until the model is destroyed, with the exception of characters in attached units who take damage from like a hazardous roll or a sniper. You don't keep hitting them, you then go back to hitting the squad normally. That's not the case here. Celestine's died, we still have the 2 Gemini, Celestine comes back, and she returns in the unit when she's destroyed. Same for any of our sisters that use this stratagem to return to the battlefield when they've been destroyed. They come back in the same squad. So once you've done that, once Celestine's gone down, and presumably popped back up again, then you can do the same thing again. Reallocate all the hits to Celestine. Once she goes down again, we still have 2 Gemini going around who still have a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save, and they can be completing actions, deploying teleport homers, and harassing the enemy.
Inquisitor, your hat looks beautiful in the light of the cicatrix.
Back to precision. We'll keep it focused on precision. You may only get precision happening when you roll a 6+ to hit. So this is one of the Tyrannid detachment rules. It is also one of the mission tactics for the Black Spear detachment of the Deathwatch. I keep using Deathwatch examples because they're such a weird and different army. They have a lot of unusual mechanics, which means they can work very nicely as examples. So if you've rolled a 6 to hit with a rule that gives you precision on a critical hit, that is normally rolling a 6. Those attacks have to be rolled separately. Not because you are rolling against a different toughness, but because only those attacks, not all of the attacks, can be allocated to the character. And precision is a choice for the attacker. You don't have to choose to allocate your attack to a character. You can choose to follow the normal allocate attack procedure. So the Sister Superior with the Contema bolt gun has precision. They could choose to kill another Neurogaunt to reduce the unit's objective control on an objective, knowing that a wound on the Neuro Tyrant wouldn't do that. Precision also works in combat and can be very easy to get. You can use the Epic Challenge to make one of your characters target an enemy character with the precision rule. That enemy character does not get to fight back against your character if you are part of an attached unit. This isn't a fair duel. This is an assassination. If your character wants to do the honorable thing and duel, then they would have to use the command point ability as well, assuming they survive. And remember, precision works the same way with shooting as in combat. The rule doesn't change to require base contact with the target character, just be in engagement range of the attached unit and have line of sight to the enemy character model. I mean, they tend to be bigger anyway or have fancy banners and head crests, so this is rarely a problem. Close combat is resolved in the same way as shooting. All attacks from a unit happen at the same time. So if my Palatine with the Blade of Said Eleanor kill a Technomancer in close combat using their precision attacks, the remaining attacks that were done at the same time are now allocated to the Wraiths. And those attacks may also be blocked or resisted by the Feel No Pain that comes from the Technomancer. Once the Palatine unit, including any attached unit, has finished their attacks, then the Feel No Pain drops, and a different unit like Repentia could go to town on the Wraiths in the same combat phase without the Feel No Pain being a bother. Let's cover a few more quick rules interactions with characters and precision. How does precision work against attached units that have multiple characters? Precision attacks go against any character model you can see. You pick which character is assigned successful wound rolls. If you had multiple precision attacks and could see more than one character, you could choose to assign wounds against a second character or bodyguard. Roll the saves one at a time, as you always use the target model's save or invulnerable save. You use the bodyguard's toughness, but the target model's save. If you kill any one character, that gives you victory points for things like assassination. If the target gets back up, like Celestine, you still score the points for assassination because the character was destroyed. There is a rules commentary note for this. Abilities that trigger on death, like Fight on Death from the Abominant in an aberrant unit, still happen, even if the destroyed character gets returned to the battlefield. We talked a lot about characters just now. Well, I talked, I don't know how much you talk back. Communication will have to be done through comments. If my tips were helpful for helping you play 40k as it was intended, please do consider giving me some tip money to get me through this month. That is the Ko-Fi link down here and in the description. It is like Patreon, but you can give one-off amounts. Now I've explained how all of the damage works when you're going against characters, let's look at the damage and abilities we can put out. I've classified all of the different abilities that we have into 4 different groups. The first one is a unit ability. So if a unit has an ability, that applies to all models in that unit, including the characters. Pure Strain Gene Stealers can advance and charge. That is true if they're a unit by themselves. It is also true if they're joined by the Patriarch. Adding a Patriarch doesn't remove or exchange that ability for a different one. Then we have model abilities. So these will specify that the model itself is doing it. So, the Ministorum Priest has Zealot. once per battle in the fight phase, this model can use this ability, and it improves the strength and attacks characteristics of melee weapons equipped by this model. So that wouldn't apply to any other models in the unit they have joined. There are some abilities that only happen when a character is leading a unit. The Ministorum Priest has Righteous Smiting. While this model is leading a unit, each time a model in that unit makes a melee attack, add 1 to the wound roll. So that will apply to all of the models in the unit, including the Ministorum Priest. But if the Ministorum Priest was by themselves, either from having the bodyguard destroyed or from being deployed that way, this ability wouldn't be active. One model by themselves is not leading a unit. You need to be part of an attached unit to be considered leading a unit. If there is more than one character in the unit, both of them are considered to be leading the unit, and both of their abilities are active while they are leading a unit. And the fourth kind of ability are unit abilities that are only active while they're being led by a character. The Celestian Sacrosanct Sworn Protectors. While an Adeptus Sororitas character is leading the unit, each time an attack targets this unit, subtract 1 from the wound roll. If the Celestian Sacrosancts didn't have a character attached, they wouldn't get that ability. If the character that joined them was killed by precision, then their ability would stop working as soon as the attacking unit had finished its attacks. That covers characters. If you want more help or have any more questions, we have a Help and Cope Rules Questions text channel in my Discord, where we try and help each other out. You can join. The link is in the description. Be sure to click that like and subscribe button on the way down. I have 3 more main rules to explore. We're going to go back a bit to think about shooting and cover, but in a whole different way. A very specific way, because we're dealing with ruins. Then the big guns never tire rule on vehicles and monsters, and finally, a bit of combat with the fight phase. You remember shooting, we were just doing a bit of that with precision attacks. You need to see a character to attack them with precision. There are cases where you can see a model, but can't shoot it. That may be due to lone operative, or it may be due to ruins. 40k 10th edition uses the rules for true line of sight. Except for all the times it doesn't, and you have to imagine the game taking place on a 2D field, and you can't shoot through ruins even if, with true line of sight, you can see through them to the other side. Ruins are expected to be the most common type of terrain on the board. Even in a jungle, a lot of players will use the rules for ruins for their woods to stop people shooting all the way through. Despite all the weird cases I'm going to explain, these ruins rules are better than 8th edition, where we did have true line of sight, where you could shoot through a window, through a door, through a crack in the space-time continuum, through a letterbox and into your opponent's models. So 9th edition brought in the idea that ruins were solid, and tournaments in 8th edition had organisers boarding up windows on the bottom floor of their terrain to make sure you couldn't shoot from one side of the battlefield to the other, with everything from the start of the game. So when we come to this version of the 40k rules, you have to imagine the area of the ruin as an infinity box. A box of infinite height that is only ever open on one side, so like a box with a lid. It is solid, you can't see all the way through, but you can open the lid to see into it. That is the simplest metaphor I can think of to explain the rules. A lot of ruins are put on a card base that acts as a footprint, but they might not be on a card base with a footprint. Then you need to agree with your opponent where the footprint is. This is usually pretty easy to do, but you may have to agree on some sections, because it will matter. Is this particular ruin one ruin like this, or is it 2 ruins with a footprint like this? It's the same for this ruin. There are 2 places you might consider to be the outline of the building. The line of the walls and rubble could demarcate where the edge of the ruin is, or the grassy card base could be the ruin's footprint as a whole, in which case you won't be able to draw line of sight across the very open-looking grass parts. Already in your mind, you have an idea of which of these 2 are correct, but your opponent may not share that understanding, unless you ask. The first thing we want to go through is the base parts of the rule, the bits that Games Workshop staff expected during their initial drafting of the rules. Okay, this red unit is behind the building. None of the models are on the footprint of the ruin. It doesn't matter that the ruin has open doors and windows and is in serious need of renovation. The blue unit can't shoot the red unit, even though they can see the red unit. The ruin acts as if it was a solid object blocking line of sight. In narrative terms, you could think of it as being full of smoke and a thick black cloud reaching up to the sky. Maybe the people who lived in the house still live in the rubble and have a fire going. I don't want to consider the levels of rules we would have to get into to figure out if these people are considered homeless. They own property and exist within that property, but does that property have to have basic living standards for humans to count as a home? Depends which landlord you ask. But that is basic example 1. Now, example 2, this unit in red is inside the footprint of the ruin. At least some part of one of the models can be seen by the models in the blue unit, so all the models in the blue unit that can see the red model can shoot the red unit. And remember that if you could see the red model, if the other models in your unit were not there, then those blue models can also shoot the red unit. Okay, the red unit gets shot, but they get the benefit of cover and have their save increased by 1. We have already gone over the benefit of cover in this video, so I'm not going to repeat myself. If there were 2 opposing units firing at each other within the ruin, then both of them would get the benefit of cover. Whether you get cover depends on if you are in the footprint, not if you're drawing line of sight like across a bit that isn't in the footprint or partially within the footprint. If you're in the ruin, you get cover, so a unit in the ruin shooting at another unit also in the same ruin, the unit being shot at will get the benefit of cover. And line of sight within the ruin is determined normally. Alright, let's combine those first 2 examples. We have this red unit with 1 model in the building. They can be shot by Unit A, and they can take more than 1 casualty. You don't stop taking wounds when all of the models in line of sight have been killed. Shooting is done against the unit, although armor saves are rolled based on the cover of the individual. So the squad loses 2 models, but importantly they lose the 1 model that was inside the footprint of the ruin. They now can't be shot by squad B as they chose to remove the 1 model in the ruin that was in line of sight. And you determine if you can shoot enemy models when the attacking unit declares its targets. So all the models in Unit A fired at the same time and killed some enemies. At this point, the models in Unit B can no longer see the target, so they can't shoot. That is infantry. Infantry is sort of one of the easier ones. It gets very different when we're dealing with other creatures. So what about tanks and monsters? Well, anything that's really big. This is a psychophage. Everyone say hello to the psychophage. The psychophage has its posterior protruding from the building. Its base is sticking out of the back of the ruin, so it is part in and part out of the ruin. The rules in this situation are that it can't shoot out. It is counting for itself as if it were behind the building and can't see through the building, but everyone else in your opponent's army can shoot it if they can see some part of the model because it is counted as being within the building. This is the worst situation, and it can only get worse by saying, "Help me step, bro." Vehicles are determined if they are inside if all parts of them are inside of the ruin's footprint. So a Lehman Russ Vanquisher with its long cannon could have the hull totally within the building, but if its long gun barrel sticks out, it suffers the same situation of not being able to shoot out of the ruin, but it can be shot. Remember, for things like the turret and the aerial and anything sticking up, the ruin's footprint is infinitely vertical. That is how it works when your base or your, the main part of the model is in the ruin. But there are different rules when the model is out of the ruin, but some part of it is sticking in. A little bit of your model is in the footprint, but the base is not in the ruins. This is an extra complicated bit in the video that is already complicated. I'm gonna need my glasses, just a second. Okay. We know that visibility is based on true line of sight. We know that if you are in a ruin and can be seen, you can be shot. We know that you draw line of sight to any part of the enemy model, but here is the situation where you don't. If a model has a sword or wings that overhang the hypothetical vertical infinity cylinder of their base, and that part of the model that overhangs the base is inside a ruin's area terrain footprint, you don't count that part of the model. Here is Magnus with his massive wings. The base is behind the ruin from the point of view of the shooting purple unit, but the wing is visible to them. But you can't shoot Magnus. There was a change to the errata. For models with a base, the model's base is used to determine if it is not within, or wholly within a ruin. And for the purposes of visibility into or through a ruin, visibility to and from a model that overhangs its base is determined only by its base and parts of the model that do not overhang its base. So you imagine an infinite cylinder around the base, any part of the model that is outside that cone, and inside the area footprint infinity tower of a ruin isn't counted as being within a ruin. But you may remember the example I gave earlier in the video with Magnus being shot at by a Dark Eldar raider. You determine your visibility as normal with true line of sight, but it's only for the purposes of visibility into or through a ruin that you don't count the overhanging parts. Other than those situations, you count the overhanging parts. So the errata doesn't apply to this situation where the whole model, including overhanging bits, are outside of a ruin. It is used only in the previous example of the body parts overhanging the model for the purposes of visibility into or through a ruin, not shooting down the alley next to a ruin. And that is why pivoting the model matters. Either they are visible, but you can't shoot them, or they are visible and you can shoot them, but they get the benefit of cover because you can't see all of them. The ruin is in the way. If you don't agree with my understanding of the rules and want to fight about it, just know that I've been working out. I can run away so fast, I will have told on you before you ever even noticed I moved. Those are big units with big wings, but we can get bigger. So big that I don't even need my glasses to see them anymore. Towering units are the big walkers that came over from Epic and Titanicus and Imperialis to bestride the tables using 40k rules. Visibility for towering units was an exception to the infinity box size ruin. They can be shot at and shot through multiple doors and windows. It made knights horrifying, and any tournament organizers who had boarded up the windows on the bottom floor in 8th edition were frantically boarding up the upper level windows with card. That was only at the start of 10th edition, and the rules were changed to stop knights, and especially wraith knights, from being able to shoot anything anywhere on the table to something more reasonable and limited. Towering units are still another exception for visibility through a ruin. If the towering unit is in the ruin, even partially, with some part of its base in the footprint of the ruin, it can be seen normally with true line of sight. This is why the footprint often extends beyond the walls, so big knights can interact with them and be seen through them where they could not fit their base through the walls of a ruin, if the ruin walls were the outline of the ruin. This also means that towering units are exceptions to the tanks with the big hulls beneath their armoured skirts. Vehicles can't shoot out of a ruin if part of their model is outside of the ruin, but a towering knight could. Aircraft kept their exception from the start of the edition. If you can see the aircraft model, it doesn't matter how many windows and bullet holes you have drawn line of sight through. If you can see a pipe from an aircraft model, you can shoot the model regardless of any number of ruins in the way. The exception to this exception is if the aircraft is in hover mode. Then it stops having the aircraft keyword and those rules don't apply. One last thing for shooting in ruins. Plunging fire, a rule just for ruins. If you're shooting, you get an extra point of armor penetration on your attacks when you're firing at enemies on the ground. That could be ground level within the ruin or ground level on a street. You have to be more than 6 inches up from the ground, so on almost all of the Games Workshop terrain in the past 20 years, that means being up 2 levels. The older buildings were 3 inches to a level, the newer terrain is 5 inches up, and the gantries are 5 inches up as well. And if we're doing height, we need to explain ruins and movement and charges. The core rules on page 15 says you can't walk through walls, but you can climb up and over them. You just measure the vertical distance, then any horizontal distance, and then any vertical distance down, if you want to go down again. If you can fly, then you can measure that diagonally, and then diagonally again. But with ruins, Infantry and beasts can walk through the walls. So flying infantry like Seraphim can fly straight through a wall, and the wall will remain intact with no comical outlines left behind. Anything that is mounted, or a swarm, or artillery that is not infantry, they would have to go up and over any walls. But the ruins rules also say you have to end a move on the ground floor with those kinds of models. But you will find that a lot of the levels don't go higher than one level, so that if you have like a dreadnought on the bottom floor, it can still attack a unit 5 inches up because engagement range is 5 inches vertically. Now with these movement rules, there are some exceptions. As always, at some point there will be more exceptions than units that actually follow the rules. Some of these exceptions come in the form of stratagems. The new Dark Angels detachment has a stratagem to let their Ravenwing bikers move through walls. The Imperial Guard Codex has another to let vehicles move through ruins instead of trying to find a gap to slide into. And the Tyranid Crusher Stampede lets its monsters move through terrain. Other exceptions get called out by name. Belisarius Cawl and the Primarchs are monsters, even though Cawl has more in common with vehicles than monsters. But they can move through a wall's ruin as if they were not there. They follow the rules more like for infantry than monsters, but only in this situation. This lets the big men keep up with the smaller big men Adeptus Astartes that the Primarchs have around. Is that all of the bad rules and strange interactions for ruins? No, but if I missed anything, I'm sure that, oh yes, of course. The wall charge blocking that you do to indicate to everyone around, not only do you have no friends, you want no friends. Even the combat units without ranged weapons are not immune to the strangeness of the ruin rules. This is called charge blocking with walls, or walling off units, or uninteractive walls. It has a lot of names, but here is a breakdown of what it is. There's a purple unit that's in cover. They are within a ruin with a wall around them, an L-shaped wall, why not? The black unit wants to charge. The purple models are just over 1 inch from the outside of the wall. This means that the enemy infantry in black, with an average 32mm base or larger trying to charge this unit, cannot fit their base within the gap between the wall and the purple models. The model won't fit. To complete a valid charge, you have to end within engagement range, which is 1 inch from the enemy, and end in base contact if you can. The rules anticipated something like this, that is why there is the 1 inch engagement range and not strict base to base. But because of the distance from the outside of the wall, where the black models may end up, to the purple models, it is more than 1 inch. So that is not a valid charge. The black models would not end in engagement range. Even though they are 4 inches away and rolled a 7 on 2d6 for their charge, they can't complete their charge legally and would have to measure around the edge of the building to get close, which means this short distance requires a 10-inch charge. But even if a 10 was rolled, that only gets 1 model in engagement range. With pile-ins, that is 4 models from a 10 model unit. It is crippling to units specializing in combat. And this can be used against the smallest of bases. The smallest base is 25mm, that is 1 inch. To be in engagement range, you have to be within 1 inch of your opponent. The wall, even the thinnest card wall, will be over 1mm. With very precise measuring, you can be 24.9mm from the wall, preventing base contact on your side of the wall, and also you'll be more than 1 inch away from the enemy models if they were on the other side of the wall. The tournament pack for Pariah Nexus alludes to this situation. It says to figure it out how you want to resolve it on your own. It is a known problem, and if the rules have designer's notes to say this shouldn't be happening, using this tactic is not a situation the rules intended for. It is a bug, not a feature. But doing it, especially outside of a tournament, puts you in a sort of exchange system. You may increase the percentage of games of 40k you win, as you decrease the number of people willing to play with you. So how do we resolve it? And you can't say that this is just a tournament problem, as a lot of tournaments have workarounds to prevent this, and hopefully your casual games are not all with L-shaped ruins cut from the corner of a cardboard box. But if you need to do that to get playing, that's okay. The WTC tournaments in the past have treated infantry as being part of the wall and within the wall, and you place them on the side of the wall that they can actually fit on. Pile-in was then a bit more difficult as you had to remember where the model actually was. They were updated, and in about February 2024 they said, okay, you have a 2-inch engagement range if you would be in combat, if not for the terrain blocking your base. Basically taking the same approach as the barricades and fuel pipes terrain. If you were able to be in contact with normal 1-inch engagement range, then you do that. If you can fit the other side and be in base contact as normal, you have to do that. But if the charge would be successful, if not for the wall in the way, that is a completed charge. This is a simplified summary of that solution. The WTC document is 12 pages long trying to resolve the issue, and it has a lot of edge cases and extra exceptions. Or, completely different from that, you could just agree that, no, we can't do that. Choose friendship. Choose life. Make good decisions today. Most people aren't going to do this because they are good people and want to have a fun game, and we know from the comments in the Tournament Companion that this is not an intended feature of the rules. Tournaments that say you can do this are of course the exception to that. But put your models up against the wall if you can so that they can be charged, or shift them back a little after a charge is seen to be in range so that the enemy can be your side of the wall and in base contact. As some tournaments still accept walling off as a viable strategy, and that really messes up tournament reporting results if the different ways of dealing with it are put together as one stat. Either it's allowed or it's not allowed. They all go together. If charge blocking is allowed, it favours an infantry army with fragile units that can't take a charge but can deliver one. Eldar, Dark Eldar, Genestealer Cult come to mind. They can't be seen, as most of the ruins in these tournaments have solid walls with no windows. They can't be charged easily, but as infantry, they can move through the wall and shoot and charge whoever they want. But if you can ignore the walls in WTC games, which often have far more terrain than other tournament setups, that strongly favours elite melee armies. So I think I've covered most of the rules interactions, especially the silly ones. In many of my more recent Warhammer 40,000 games, since I explored the rules for ruins, I have changed my table to not only have no L-shaped ruins, but to have tables with not a single ruin in sight. I used the woods, with rules for woods, and solid buildings you can't enter. The ruin rules can't hurt me if I use terrain that doesn't use those rules. We saw how vehicles and monsters have their own set of rule situations within ruins. Well, we also have an extra exceptional rule for vehicles and monsters shooting when they are within engagement range. Big guns never tire, now updated with even more situations. Big guns never tire is a long and confusing rule. I am here to explain it quickly and with the Battleotron graphic map, because Games Workshop doesn't use anything like this anymore. They employ word pasta and hope you can figure out what they mean. Here is the perfect situation to explain all aspects of the rule. We have an An Eldar Fire Prism is in combat with 3 Chaos Terminators. There are some Chaos Cultists on one side, not in engagement range of anyone, and we have some Eldar Guardians on the other side, also not locked in combat. In this example, the Chaos player is charged with the Terminators, but nothing happened in the combat. All attacks missed or something like that. It is currently the Eldar player's shooting phase, and Big Guns Never Tire gives them some options. Here is how the rule works. Even though the basic rule is that units in engagement range cannot shoot while in engagement range unless equipped with pistols, the Fire Prism is still able to shoot. The Fire Prism is equipped with a Shuriken Cannon and a Prism Cannon which has 2 fire modes. Because it is a vehicle, it can still shoot. It can shoot at the Terminators, but when it does, it is at -1 to hit. If it did have any pistol weapons, those particular weapons would not suffer the -1 to hit when firing. It can fire these shots at the Terminators even if the Guardians were also in engagement range of the Terminators. The only weapon it cannot fire at the Terminators is anything with the Blast special rule. Page 26 of the core rules on blast weapons is where this little addendum can be found. You cannot fire blast weapons at a unit in engagement range. Big Guns Never Tire does not override this, so it cannot fire its Fire Prism as a dispersed pulse, but could choose to fire it as focused lancers at the Terminators. There are other options. The Fire Prism can shoot at the Cultists. This is the very first line of Big Guns Never Tire. Monsters and vehicles are eligible to shoot while in engagement range, full stop. So the Fire Prism could fire one of its weapons or all of its weapons at the cultists. Because the cultists are not in engagement range of anyone, the Fire Prism could use its dispersed pulse profile that has the blast special rule. When firing at the cultist unit, again the Fire Prism is at -1 to hit rolls, but if any of its weapons had the pistol keyword, it could shoot the cultists without the -1 penalty. If there was another Eldar unit in combat with the cultists, Banshees for example, the Fire Prism could not shoot at the cultists. Big Guns Never Tire does not override the rule that you cannot fire into engagement range, but it lets the vehicle or monster shoot at units in engagement range of itself. Forget the Banshees for now. The Guardians cannot shoot the Terminators, even though their weapons pose no risk to the Fire Prism grav tank. You would have thought that small arms could be used and have been used historically to remove infantry that are attacking friendly tanks. But that is not an option in the far future of Warhammer 40,000. Again, let's assume for simplicity that all shots missed in the shooting phase and the combat phase, and it is now the Chaos player's turn. They choose not to fall back with the Terminators, and the cultists remain stationary. The cultists can shoot the Fire Prism. The cultist with a heavy weapon in the squad is at -1 to hit the Fire Prism, as per Big Guns Never Tire. The other cultists have pistols, and they do not suffer this -1 to hit, again, as per the Big Guns Never Tire rule. The Terminators can't shoot the Fire Prism unless they had pistol weapons. Pistol weapons can be fired in engagement range even though it is not normally allowed. As they don't have pistol weapons, they cannot shoot, neither at the Fire Prism or at the Guardians. This does mean that the grav tank is shooting them, but they are not able to shoot back. This is how it is intended to be in the rules. In the charge phase, a Chaos Hellbrute comes out of nowhere and charges the Guardians. You may have seen them on Space Marine 2. Hellbrutes are freaky creatures and, importantly, are vehicles. It misses its attacks in combat. Everyone does. The two players are just very unlucky today. In the coming Eldar shooting phase, the Guardians cannot shoot because they do not have pistol weapons. The Fire Prism is in the same situation as its previous turn. It can shoot the cultists and can use blast weapons against them, it can shoot the Terminators but can't use blast weapons, and even though it is not in combat with the Hellbrute, it can shoot the Hellbrute. Why can it shoot the Hellbrute that's in combat, but it couldn't shoot the cultists that were in combat with the Banshees? Because Big Guns Never Tire. It is the same reason that the cultists can shoot the Fire Prism. It is a monster or vehicle in engagement range with friendly models. No blast weapons can shoot at vehicles in engagement range as per the blast rule, but the Fire Prism can shoot the Hellbrute. It is at -1 to hit because it is using Big Guns Never Tire to shoot, and it is at another -1 to hit because it is targeting an enemy vehicle or monster in engagement range. But remember from the start of the video, you cannot be more than net result of -1 to hit. When the Hellbrute charged, the Fire Prism could not fire Overwatch at the Hellbrute. That would take place in the enemy charge phase, and you cannot fire Overwatch while in engagement range. Big Guns Never Tire is only in the controlling player's shooting phase. This is explicitly covered by the out of phase rule in the rules commentary. When it comes around to its shooting phase, the Hellbrute is in the same situation as the grav tank. It could shoot the Guardians, it could shoot the Eldar grav tank. It would be at -1 to shoot the Guardians, or it would be -1 and potentially another -1 to shoot the grav tank. If you want to double check any of this, the rule can be found on page 20 of the main rulebook for 10th edition of 40k. And so we come to the final rule. Once we are out of cover and ruins and shooting, I find it much easier. The fight phase is usually easier to understand than the shooting phase, but there is one big part that needs explaining. Fight first. It sounds straightforward. I have fight first, so I fight first. But if two units have fight first, who fights first? I have the Battleotron, which will definitely behave, because rather than just talk about it with words alone, this obviously makes more sense with images. So in this example, you are playing the Eldar, and I'm playing Genestealer Cult. It is your turn, and you have the Howling Banshees charge my Acolytes, which has a Locust in the squad, and your Storm Guardians charge the remaining Metamorphs. We also have an ongoing combat between some of my Neophytes and your Dire Avengers. What order do our units fight in? In the steps of the fight phase, players alternate selecting eligible units from their army one at a time, starting with units that can fight first, and starting that part with the player whose turn is not taking place. So it's in this order. We alternate units, starting with fights first, not taking their turn, then taking their turn and fights first, alternate until all of those are done, then the player not taking their turn chooses a unit, then the player taking their turn, alternate back and forth until all those units are done. So in our game here, this is the order that attacks take place. My Locus has the fight first ability on his index card, and as part of an attached unit, the whole unit, Locus and Acolytes, get fight first. The Banshees also have fight first on their data card, and units that completed a charged move this turn also gain fight first. This is the most common benefit of charging. TM. So of the 6 units on the board, 3 of them have fight first. This Acolyte unit, the Banshees, and the Storm Guardians. As my turn is not taking place, I go first with one of my units that can fight first. It doesn't matter that the Banshees have fight first on their card and also got fight first from charging. There is no such thing as double fight first. They just have fight first. My Locus and Acolytes attack the Banshees, completing the steps on pages 33 to 35 of the main rules, and kill 2 Banshees. It is now over to you, and you can choose either of your units with fight first, the Storm Guardians or the Banshees. Unlike in earlier editions of 40k, you don't fight back immediately once attacked. This is a lot more like Age of Sigmar now, where you choose a unit to activate, so you don't have to pick the Banshees. Do not get sucked into the routine of fighting back, because you'll put yourself at a disadvantage. In this example it won't actually matter, but what would matter is if the Metamorphs also had fight first, you wouldn't want to be fighting with your Banshees that have nothing else to threaten them this phase, when the Guardians have yet to attack. So you choose the Storm Guardians, and they wipe out the Metamorphs. As the Guardians are not within 3 inches of an enemy unit, or within 3 inches of an objective, they don't consolidate. So, it is back to me, my activation. However, I have no more units at this fight first step. So it is you again, and you have to choose the unit of Banshees as the only other unit that has fight first. The Battletron is kind of acting up and doesn't want to take tokens off, so let's just say in this example, the Banshees missed all of their attacks. It happens. So we move on to the next step. The player not taking their turn attacks with one of their units that does not have fight first. So, my Neophytes. They attack the Dire Avengers, and they do nothing with their tiny knives. Now comes the final step. The player whose turn is taking place fights with a unit that does not have fight first. The Dire Avengers fight, so they kill 4 Neophytes, and apparently also crash the Battletron. As I get the Battletron back up, I should tell you of a rule exploit you can use to get around fight first. We saw that the Howling Banshees are fragile and want to go first so they don't get murdered. But they also want to attack the Locus and Bodyguard. Here is what you do. The Storm Guardians charge the Metamorphs, and the Banshees also charge the Metamorphs. The Locus and Acolytes are not in engagement range, but are within 3 inches of the Banshees. So I have no units that can activate to fight first. None of my fight first units are in engagement range. You attack with the Storm Guardians and wipe out the Metamorphs. They are not within 3 inches of the Locus unit, so can't consolidate. The Banshees are eligible to fight because they completed a charge move this turn, so they pile into the closest unit, the Locus. The Banshees roll their attacks. Hang on, you might say. What is this? We established that the Locus fights before the Banshees as the non-active player fighting first. But after the Storm Guardians were done, the Locus and Acolytes were still not eligible to fight, so can't be selected. The Banshees pile in, make their attacks, and consolidate. Then, if they are still alive, the Locus and Acolytes are now eligible to be chosen to fight as they are fight first and are now in engagement range. Then the Neophytes fight, then the Dire Avengers. It's pretty tricksy. But there is an easy counter to those cunning Eldar. Heroic Intervention. As long as you have 1 command point, you can heroically intervene. This lets the Locus and Acolytes charge if they are within 6 inches, which they are. You don't get fights first from the charge bonus, but they don't need it. The Locus gives the unit fight first, and as the non-active player, the Locus and Acolytes get to fight before the Banshees. That is it. That is all I've got. All the rules I wish were simpler. The confusing and mystifying rules all updated for the current version of 10th edition 40k and mostly re-recorded to suit the absurdly frequently changing rulebook. Haha! I tricked you into learning 40k by complaining about 40k 10th edition. Now you have to play it. Choose your faction in this video and have a great day of 40k.